My name is Shimon, and I'm 56 years old. For a living, I design and I build things. More specifically, I'm an architect, and I'd like to think I'm a very good one. My world is simple, really. It's not people. People are variables, unpredictable, messy. My world is all about rules, physics, math, loads and stresses. You follow the rules, the building stands up. You break them, it falls down. I don't design flimsy suburban houses. I design statements. Complex, modern structures that look like they defy gravity. But they don't. They just follow the rules so perfectly that they look impossible. I'm known for being meticulous. Obsessive, my junior draftsmen probably whisper when I'm gone. I don't care. Close enough is how people get hurt. Precision is everything. Every angle, every millimeter, every single material stress test, every single thing matters. My plans are not suggestions, they are scripture. That's why I took this last job. The client was some reclusive billionaire, Adam, who wanted a private place for reflection. It was basically a high-concept mausoleum out in the middle of nowhere on a desolate stretch of coast. The design he wanted was a nightmare, a structuralist's headache, all intersecting non-Euclidean angles, hidden rooms and spaces meant to evoke feelings. I hate designing for feelings. I design for function. I saw it as the ultimate test of my skills. I was going to impose perfect, rational order on his ridiculous, abstract ideas. And I did. The blueprints are a masterpiece of problem solving, a testament to pure, cold logic. I'm here now, on site, for the final walkthrough. Just me and the structure. It's finished, and it's quiet. A heavy, absorbent quiet that only tons of concrete can create. The air is still, smelling of dust and gypsum. I told you I'm obsessive. I wasn't born this way. It was learned the hard way. 30 years ago, when I was just starting out, I made a mistake. A tiny one. A single calculation buried in 100 pages of plans. A beam was off by, what was it, 6 millimeters? 6. Nobody died, thank God. But a whole cantilevered balcony on a public building sagged. It didn't collapse, it just drooped like it was tired. The media had a field day. They called me the droopy architect. It was humiliating. The feeling of my own trusted numbers, my language, turning on me. I can still feel that hot sickness in my stomach. Standing in that boardroom, being shown the pictures, I wasn't just embarrassed, I was a fraud. My own logic had failed me. I swore never again. From that day on, I checked everything. Then I checked it again. Then I had someone else check it. And then I checked their work. My reputation is built on that promise. My buildings do not fail. My angles are true. My spaces are rational. My biggest fear isn't heights or spiders or even dying. My biggest fear is the loss of control. The idea that the world I've built my life on, the world of physics, of concrete, of measurable space, could just stop making sense. And that's why I'm standing in the lobby of my greatest achievement, holding my perfect blueprints and feeling the first cold sting of discrepancy. I'm looking at the hallway in front of me, and I know with every fiber of my being that the angle of that wall is not the angle I designed. My first thought wasn't ghosts. My first thought was that idiot foreman. He improvised. I was furious. How dare he deviate from the plan? He saw a problem, probably with the rebar placement, and thought he could just fix it without consulting me. I was furious. I dropped my briefcase right there on the dusty concrete, pulled my laser measure from my tool belt, and stalked over to the wall. The sun was getting low, casting long, strange shadows across the lobby, making the new concrete look bruised. "I'll have his job for this," I was muttering. "I'll have his license." I pressed the measure's base flat against the reference wall, aimed the little red dot down the hall, and pressed the button. Click. I read the number on the digital display. My stomach twisted. It wasn't off by 6 millimeters. It was off by 4 degrees. That's not a mistake. That's not possible. I stared at the number, waiting for it to change. A 4-degree shift in a load-bearing wall? The foundation would be shattered. The ceiling would have collapsed. The rebar would be screaming under the impossible tension. But everything was pristine, solid, perfect. "My tool's broken," I said out loud, just to hear a voice. The silence in the lobby just swallowed the words. I shook it, as if that would fix a faulty laser. I took the measurement again. Same reading. I unclipped my old-school analog angle finder from my belt, the one I trust. I held its metal arms against the concrete. The laser was right. The wall was wrong. My brain just stalled. It couldn't process the data. This wasn't a droop. This was a violation of geometry. A building cannot be this wrong and still be standing. It cannot. I felt shaky. I needed to reset. I needed to check something I knew was right, a control variable. The reflection chamber, I decided. It's the centerpiece of the whole design, a perfect cube, 10 meters by 10 meters by 10 meters, suspended inside the main structure, a box within a box. I checked it myself last week. It was perfect. It was my anchor. I had to prove the wall was the only flaw. I had to isolate the error. I walked down the main hallway, my blueprints clutched in my hand. The sound of my own footsteps on the polished concrete was the only thing I could hear. Clack, clack, clack. It was too loud. It felt wrong. I was rationalizing. I'm tired. The light is playing tricks. I misread the plans. But I never misread the plans. I turned the corner where the entrance to the chamber should be. And I stopped dead. There was no doorway. It wasn't bricked up. It wasn't boarded over. It was just gone. In its place was a solid, seamless, perfectly smooth stretch of concrete, identical to the rest of the wall. I ran my hands over it. It was real, cold and solid. It felt like it had been there since the foundation was poured. No! I was fumbling with my blueprints, unfolding the page for this section, holding it up to the blank wall like a madman. No, the door is here. It's right here. A 3-meter opening. My voice was tight. My heart was hammering, a dry, painful thud in my chest. I looked back the way I came, toward the lobby. I could still see the open entrance, a bright rectangle of fading orange light. It looked very, very far away. I turned back to the impossible wall. I had to be wrong. I had to be disoriented. I pounded my fist on the concrete. It was solid. It hurt. This wasn't drywall. This was load-bearing, reinforced fact. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. When I opened them, the wall was different. It was still solid, but now, about 2 meters to my left, a hairline crack had appeared. I heard it before I saw it, a faint ticking sound, like a piece of quartz cooling. A tiny, dark fissure running from the floor to the ceiling. It wasn't there a second ago. I know it wasn't. And as I stared, a puff of cold air, smelling of damp earth, whispered out of it. My brain was screaming at me, "Get out! Get in the car! Drive away! Call the developer! Call Adam! Call anyone!" But I couldn't move. That crack, it wasn't on the plans. That smell. This whole building was climate-controlled, sealed. It shouldn't smell like Earth. I'm an architect. I solve problems. This was just a very big problem. I had to understand it. I pulled the high-powered flashlight from my tool belt and walked toward the crack. I shined the light into it. It wasn't a crack. It was a gap. The wall had split. On the other side wasn't rebar or insulation. It was a hallway. A narrow, dark hallway that I had not designed. "What is this?" I whispered. "A service corridor I forgot? Impossible! I don't forget." A sound came from down that new hallway. A faint, dry skittering, like sand pouring over stone. This is the point where any sane person would have run. I know that, but you have to understand. This thing was a flaw in my work. It was a 6mm mistake magnified into a nightmare. I couldn't leave it. I had to see. I turned sideways and squeezed through the gap. The concrete was cold and scraped against my jacket. I was in. The hallway was barely a meter wide. The ceiling was low, pressing down. It stank of damp soil and something else, something old. I turned to look back at the gap I'd just come through. There was no gap. There was just a solid wall of concrete. I lunged at it, pounding my fist. "No! No!" It was solid as the wall that shouldn't have been there in the first place. My breath hitched. The panic, the real panic, grabbed my throat. I was in. I shined my flashlight down the new corridor. It stretched into darkness. I was in a part of my building that did not exist. And from deep in that darkness, I heard the sound again, louder this time. Scrape, shift, drag. It wasn't one sound, it was hundreds. The sound of 1,000 stones all grinding against each other. The sound of geometry remaking itself. And I was at its center. I tried to be rational. I am in a service chase. The foreman added this without telling me. I will find a maintenance hatch. I will walk to the end. I walked. The flashlight beam cut a perfect white circle in the dark. The walls weren't smooth, poured concrete. They were rough, almost like hewn rock. The smell of damp earth was overpowering, like a freshly dug grave. That grinding sound, it wasn't in front of me anymore. It was behind me. I spun around. The corridor was empty, but it felt shorter. I couldn't be sure. I turned and walked faster. My blueprints were still in my hand. Useless. A map of a place I wasn't in. I was in the walls. I was in the spaces between my perfect measurements. I don't know how long I walked. An hour? 3? My mouth was dry. The beam of my flashlight was starting to look yellow, weaker. I was in my late 50s, not a young man. My knees ached. I finally came to a set of stairs. Concrete, utilitarian. They weren't on any plan. Stairs go up, I reasoned. Up is the roof. Up is out. I climbed. I climbed for what felt like forever. I came out into a new hallway. But this wasn't the roof. It was another floor. A floor that should not exist. The building I designed had 6 stories. This was 7. I ran to a window. It was just a black, reflective sheet of glass. I pounded on it. It was thick, unmoving. And outside, there was nothing. No city lights, no coast, no stars, just black, an absolute featureless void. I started to run. I ran down the long hallway, and I noticed the curve. It was subtle, so subtle a normal person wouldn't see it. But I'm an architect. I see angles. The wall was curving inwards, an impossible long, perfect radius that my blueprint said was a straight line. I ran, and the curve just kept going. My logical mind was shattering. I was on a floor that didn't exist, in a building I designed, running in a circle. That's when I started to truly lose it. My old trauma, that 6mm mistake, it felt small. This was wrong. This wasn't a miscalculation. This was a recalculation. The building was thinking. I stopped running. I was gasping, my heart feeling like it would burst. The grinding sound was back. It was all around me now. Scrape, shift, drag. It was the sound of the walls. The walls themselves were moving. The long, curving corridor, it was getting tighter. The ceiling, I realized, was lower than it was a minute ago. I wasn't being hunted. I was being filed. The building was compressing me, hurting me. I saw an opening ahead, a dark square on the floor, an unfinished service shaft. The foundation, I thought. If I can get to the foundation, I can get out. I ran for it, and the building shoved. The floor didn't just tilt, it warped. The geometry itself broke. The walls pressed in, scraping my shoulders, forcing me toward that black square. The sound was deafening now, the shriek of 1,000 tons of concrete shifting, of physics tearing itself apart. My greatest skill, my understanding of space, was useless. The space was lying. I fell into the shaft, into the cold, earthy dark. I landed hard on a pile of dirt, knocking the wind out of me. My flashlight clattered and went out. I was in total blackness, and above me, I heard the most terrifying sound of all. The slow, grinding, final scrape of the shaft sealing itself shut. The construction crews arrived the next morning. I think I heard them. Faint vibrations, muffled by an impossible amount of earth and concrete. Or maybe that's just the memory of vibration. It is very quiet here. They found my briefcase in the lobby, right where I dropped it. My car was still in the lot. They walked the site. The foreman, the one I'd been so ready to fire, was there with his own set of plans. They checked my laser measurements against their own. The wall in the lobby? Perfect, 90 degrees on the dot. The reflection chamber? The doorway was exactly where it should be. The entire building was perfect, to the millimeter. The police were called. They searched. They brought in dogs, who just whined and refused to enter the lobby. They found nothing. No secret passages, no hairline cracks, no 7th floor. They brought in thermal imagers. They saw nothing but solid concrete and rebar. They figured I must have had a breakdown, just wandered off into the city. That droopy architect finally cracking up. Adam, the developer, was impatient. The project continued. It's finished now. People are in it. I can feel them. Not see them, but feel their movement, the stresses they put on the structure. They say the building makes them uneasy. They complain about rooms feeling smaller than they are. They report getting lost in simple hallways they've walked a dozen times. One of them, a woman, refuses to go near the reflection chamber. She says it feels wrong. I'm still here, you see. I'm in the walls. I'm in the impossible spaces between the perfect measurements. I'm in the 4-degree variance. I spent my whole life terrified of a 6-millimeter mistake. I built a monument to precision to prove I was better than that. But the world, it's not rational. The space itself is not rational. My building, it follows rules, just not my rules. It needed to settle. It needed to fit where it was built. And I was the part that didn't fit. I was the illogical element. I designed this place, and I am its final, permanent structural flaw. I am the error that was corrected. It has become my very own self-designed tombstone.
They say the sea is the last great mystery on Earth, but that's not quite right. It's a mystery only because we lack the will and the funding to solve it. Everything, and I mean everything, can be understood if you just have the right tools, the right pressure gauges, the right sonar, the right light. Knowledge is a kind of armor. I've built my entire life on that single, simple principle, a fortress of observation and data against the chaos of the unknown. My name is Jules, and I hunt monsters for a living. Not the kind with horns and pitchforks, but the kind the pressure builds. I'm a marine biologist, and my very specific, very lonely little niche is abyssal gigantism. I study the things that grow to impossible sizes in the crushing dark, thousands of meters below the surface where the water is a single degree above freezing and sunlight is a forgotten myth. Down there, the rules of biology bend. Squid grow as long as buses. Isopods become the size of dogs. It's a world of beautiful, terrifying mathematics, and I am one of its few obsessive accountants. I'm currently parked in the middle of the Pacific, floating over the Mariana Trench in a research vessel that smells of diesel, old coffee, and the faint, corrosive tang of salt. This tub, the Wanderer, is the only one that would have me and my French project. Below us is a gash in the planet's crust, so deep you could drop a mountain in it and still have a kilometer of water to spare. I'm here to prove a theory. Not my theory, but his, Dr. Eris Thorne. He believed that abyssal gigantism was just the beginning. He theorized that in the absolute deepest, most punishing parts of the trench, the Hadal zone, there exist organisms on a scale for which we have no framework. Life that is not just big, but incomprehensibly vast. The scientific community called him a romantic, a crank. I called him my mentor. That's the professional reason I'm here, the one I put on the grant proposals. The real reason is a ghost story. Eris disappeared 10 years ago, right here, in this exact patch of indifferent blue water. He was on a solo dive in a submersible he designed himself, the Icarus. I was on the comms, a 26-year-old grad student hanging on his every word as he descended into the black. He was ecstatic, reporting pressure and temperature readings that were off the charts, life signs that made no sense. He described a field of bioluminescent flora that pulsed in a coordinated, rhythmic way he'd never seen before. He was laughing, his voice crackling with static and wonder, telling me we were about to change the world. And then he wasn't. There was no scream, no sound of metal groaning under pressure, just a sudden, sharp burst of static, like the universe itself had shrieked. The telemetry feeds went haywire, every sensor redlining at once. The hydrophones picked up a single, ultra-low frequency pulse that wasn't a whale, wasn't a geological event, wasn't anything on our charts. Then silence. The kind of profound, empty silence that feels louder than any noise. We searched for weeks. We found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no ping from the emergency beacon. The official report cited a catastrophic hull failure, a tragic accident. But I saw the data before they sealed the records. You don't get readings like that from a crack in a viewport. You get them when something that has existed in the dark for millions of years, something ancient and vast and utterly oblivious, finally moves. My terror isn't of the dark, or the pressure, or the monsters that might live there. My terror is of insignificance. It's the soul-shredding fear that the universe doesn't just not care about you, it doesn't even know you exist. So tomorrow, I'm getting in my own submersible, the Orpheus. I'm going down to the same coordinates where Eris vanished. I'm going to find what he found. I have to. Because if I can measure it, if I can classify it, if I can just understand it, then he wasn't just erased. He was noticed. And I can live with that, I think. The descent was beautiful. For the first 9,000 meters, it was exactly what I had trained for, what I had dreamed of. My submersible, the Orpheus, performed flawlessly, a perfect little bubble of light and life against the encroaching dark. Through the thick acrylic viewport, I watched the world dissolve from azure to indigo to absolute black, cataloging the strange, elegant creatures that drifted past like ghosts in my floodlights. Cenophores trailed rainbow lights like living fiber optics, and giant jellyfish, their bells wider than I was tall, pulsed with a soft internal luminescence. I was in my element, my voice a calm, steady monologue into the mission recorder, logging every observation. Every data point, every new species logged was a victory. It was a vindication of Eris, of my entire life's work. The deep wasn't empty, it was majestic, serene, and it was finally yielding its secrets to me. I felt triumphant. I was documenting a particularly large bloom of the jellies, their gentle ballet a soothing presence in the abyss when it happened. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my teeth and the bones of my skull before my ears registered it. The water outside shimmered with the concussion. Then came a single, violent jolt. The Orpheus was thrown sideways as if swatted by an unseen hand, and my world became a chaotic mess of screaming alarms and flashing red lights. I was slammed against my restraints, the neat stacks of my equipment crashing to the floor in a shower of plastic and glass. Outside the viewport, the serene ballet of lights vanished, replaced by a swirling cloud of silt and panicked life. The main comms panel went dead with a final pathetic crackle. The power and data tether icon on my primary screen blinked yellow, then red, then went dark. Severed. I was alone, untethered, and falling through the deepest, darkest part of the world. After what felt like an eternity of spinning through the black, things stabilized. The emergency batteries kicked in, casting a low, grim red light through the cabin. I was adrift, but alive. My sonar was still active, and after a few frantic minutes of rebooting essential systems, it gave me a reading. Seafloor. 10,984 meters down. The numbers were a comfort, a piece of solid data in a world of chaos. I was falling, but I knew where the bottom was. The impact was surprisingly gentle, more of a soft settling than a crash, as if I'd landed on something yielding. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the hum of the life support and the frantic pounding of my own heart. The silence from the comms was absolute. No one was coming for me. But I was a scientist. Panic is a useless data point. I took a breath, steadied my hands, and turned on the external floodlights. The view outside was breathtaking. I had landed on a vast, flat plain, far flatter than any abyssal plain I'd ever seen mapped. It was covered in a thin layer of what looked like dark gray sediment, and stretching for kilometers in every direction were the fields of bioluminescent flora Ares had described. They weren't just pulsing randomly, they were moving in slow, coordinated waves of soft blue light, like a wind blowing across a field of ghostly grass. It was the most beautiful, alien thing I'd ever seen. My fear, the raw animal terror of the fall, began to recede, replaced by the familiar, intoxicating thrill of discovery. This was it. I had found his miracle. I was looking at a completely new ecosystem, maybe even a new form of life. But something was wrong. My gravimeter was giving me unstable readings, fluctuating in a slow, rhythmic way that made no sense. And the plane, it wasn't perfectly still. I focused my main camera on a ridge in the sediment a few hundred meters away, and I saw it shift. It was a slow, rhythmic movement, an undulation. The entire seafloor, this plain that stretched beyond the reach of my lights, was breathing. A deep, impossibly slow inhalation that took nearly a minute to complete, followed by an equally long exhalation. My mind, my logical, analytical mind, refused to accept what my eyes and instruments were telling me. It had to be a complex geothermal process, a super colony of microbes creating a chemical reaction that mimicked respiration. It had to be anything other than the truth. The alternative was a conclusion so massive, so paradigm-shattering, that my brain simply refused to compute it. I had to know. I powered up the external manipulator arm, my movements slow and deliberate, my heart a slow, heavy drum. If I could just get a sample of the sediment, of the rock underneath, I could analyze its composition. I could understand it. The metal claw extended from the sub, its small floodlight cutting a sharp, clinical beam through the dark. As it neared the surface, the rhythmic pulsing of the flora around me faltered, then stopped altogether. Everything went dark and still. The universe seemed to be holding its breath.
The claw touched the ground, its pincers digging gently into the sediment, ready to close. The reaction was not geological. It was biological. The entire plane erupted in a blinding flash of golden light. Every single organism for kilometers in every direction flared in perfect, instantaneous synchrony. The light was so intense, it overloaded my cameras, but not before I saw what lay beneath the thin veil of silt. It wasn't rock. It was hide, a vast, wrinkled, ancient landscape of skin, scarred with craters and ravines so immense they could have been mountain ranges. The ground beneath me wasn't like it was breathing, it was breathing. I hadn't landed on the seafloor. I had landed on something that was living on it, something so colossal it had become the seafloor itself. My frantic hands flew across the controls, trying to fire the emergency thrusters, to do anything to get away, but it was too late. A current, powerful and inexorable, that caught me. It was pulling the Orpheus forward, dragging my tiny metal shell across the living continent of flesh. I was being drawn towards a new feature that was resolving out of the darkness ahead. It was a chasm, a swirling, miles-wide vortex of that same liquid golden light, a colossal, spiraling abyss in the flesh of the world. It was a geological feature on a planetary scale, and my mind screamed, trying to classify it. A siphonophore on a planetary scale? A mouth? A wound? As I was pulled closer, the light from the abyss grew, illuminating the true, mind-breaking topography of the creature. I was a single bacterium on the skin of a whale, and this whale was the size of a tectonic plate. The sheer, crushing scale of it annihilated every theory ever held, every metric I had ever used, my life's work, my obsessive need to classify what's a child's stamp collection in the face of the cosmos. And then I realized with a final, soul-shattering certainty that the chasm wasn't mouth. And it wasn't a wound. The swirling light within it was coalescing, forming a structure of impossible complexity and size. It was an eye inside an iris, inside a sclera the size of a country. It was an eye, and it was beginning to open.
The moment of perception was not violent. It was silent, absolute, and total. As the great eye focused, the current pulling me forward ceased. I was simply held, suspended in the water a few kilometers from a celestial body made of living tissue. The golden light that emanated from it was not like the light from my flood lamps, a simple projection of photons. This light was information. It passed through the hull of the Orpheus as if it were glass, as if it weren't there at all. It passed through me. I did not see images or hear sounds. Instead, my mind, my consciousness, was flooded with a sudden, devastating understanding. The creature was not hostile. It was not even truly aware of me in any way I could comprehend. My existence, my submersible, my entire species, was a phenomenon so fleeting, so infinitesimally small, that it barely registered. The being perceived me not as a life form, but as a momentary, complex chemical reaction in the liquid that surrounded it, no more significant than a single salt crystal dissolving in the ocean. Eris Thorne's disappearance, the severing of my tether, they weren't attacks. They were the equivalent of a human blinking, a microscopic, unconscious twitch of an eyelid, causing a ripple in the water that had erased him from existence. My mind, the fortress I had built from data and logic, was dismantled not by force, but by perspective. The knowledge I had sought my entire life, the armor I had so carefully constructed, was a paper shield against a supernova. The creature's consciousness was a universe of its own. I felt the slow, deliberate thoughts of eons, the awareness of gravity and dark matter.
the patient observation of galaxies being born and dying. It was a being that did not live in the ocean. The ocean was a temporary condition of a planet it inhabited. My instruments were useless. My life's work was a footnote to a footnote in a language that had not yet been invented. My terror of insignificance was not a fear, it was the fundamental truth of the universe. I had come down here to measure a monster, and I had found God. And God, in its infinite placid existence, had not even noticed me. The emergency lights in the Orpheus flickered and died. The hum of the life support faded. My last breath misted the cold acrylic of the viewport. I was a scientist to the end, my final useless data point, my own life, a brief spark of electrical activity, being calmly, passively, and utterly comprehended into nothing. I had wanted to solve the mystery, and the answer was that I was not, and had never been, a part of the equation.
I see people glaring at me with weird looks sometimes when I speak, as if I'd speak an alien language or something. It's usually when I use a word like qualia in a casual sentence. I know I'm not like most people. My name is Alex. I'm 32. Most people my age are worried about mortgages or finding a partner or what their kids are going to be for Halloween. I'm worried about, well, being. Just the fact of it. The baseline state of awareness. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment near the university, and it's a mess. Not a dirty mess, a cluttered mess. The walls are just stacks of books, physics, philosophy, neuroscience. My kitchen table is covered in printouts of brain scans, stained with the rings of cold coffee cups. It smells like old paper and my entire diet. I'm a PhD student. My thesis, if I ever finish it, is basically trying to find the off switch for consciousness. See, I've always felt detached, like I'm watching my own life through a window. I find more reality in the abstract, in the logic of an equation or the structure of an argument, than I do in, say, a birthday party. Social gatherings are just a confusing soup of irrational biological impulses. My whole life has been this one relentless intellectual quest. I'm trying to find the proof. The goal isn't just a degree. It's not for the funny hat and the handshake. I am on a personal, desperate mission to prove, logically, that when the brain stops, I stop. That's it. I need to know in a way I can prove on paper that oblivion is real. Most people are afraid of dying. I get it. The great unknown. But me? I'm terrified of not being able to. This whole thing, this fear, it's not rational, which is what drives me crazy. My entire academic life is built on one single logical premise. Consciousness is a biological process. It's a trick. It's just a weird emergent property of a lump of meat in our skulls. And when that meat goes bad, when the wiring breaks, the software bug that is self-awareness is gone. The lights go out, it's over. That thought is the most comforting thing in the world to me. Seriously, it's my comfort blanket. Peace, non-existence, an end to the noise. Because the alternative is the thing that keeps me up at 3 a.m. staring at the water stains on my ceiling. It's this thought I can't shake. This cold, sick dread that my premise is wrong. What if consciousness isn't the brain? What if it's something else? Something that just uses the brain, like a radio signal uses a receiver. And when the receiver breaks, the signal, it just keeps going. That's the horror. Not ghosts, not monsters. It's the idea that when my body fails, when my brain rots in a box, the me part, the awareness, doesn't stop. It just floats. Trapped. No eyes, no ears, no thoughts. Just perceiving. Forever. A powerless, eternal is. Stuck in the dark. I needed to prove that switch existed. And I think, God help me, I just proved the opposite. It wasn't a single eureka moment. It was a slow, creeping rot. It started with a paper I found buried in an online archive. A paper from a fringe biophysicist in the 70s named Dr. Daniil. He was laughed out of the field, died in obscurity. He had this theory, this noise he claimed to have measured, a persistent, ultra-low frequency electromagnetic field that lingered around dying brain tissue. Not for seconds, but for hours. He called it residual consciousness. The academic world called it bad shielding, statistical noise, and, more often, career suicide. I was bored. I was stuck on my thesis. The data wasn't cooperating. So I decided to replicate his experiment. For fun. A quick, satisfying side project to debunk a crackpot. I got access to the university's neural lab after hours, used tissue samples destined for incineration. My setup was 1,000 times more sensitive than his. I had quantum-level shielding, passively cooled sensors. I was going to prove definitively that Dr. Daniil was a hack, and that my premise, the biological off switch, was sound. I ran the test. I watched the tissue die. I watched the last potassium ion fire. The monitors flatlined. Biological, clinical, electrical death. I was about to pack up, feeling a little smug. And then I looked at the long-range spectrum analysis, and I found it. It was there, in my data. A signal. It was so faint, almost undetectable. But it wasn't noise. It wasn't a power surge. It was a coherent, complex, repeating pattern. It didn't fade. It just stayed. I spent a month trying to disprove it. A full, frantic, sleepless month. I shielded the room in mu metal. I checked the power grid for surges. I blamed solar flares. I recalibrated my equipment until the screws were stripping. I reran the calculations until the numbers blurred on the page. But it was always there. Every single time. The data was clean. My comfort blanket wasn't just gone. It had turned into a shroud. My own data, my own proof, had confirmed my single most terrifying nightmare. The lights don't go out.
That's when my logic twisted. It broke. My mind, which had always run on clean, linear tracks, found itself derailed in a swamp. It had to find a new path. Okay, I thought, pacing my apartment at 4 a.m., the data from the lab glowing on my monitor. Okay, The signal lingers, but it's tied to the tissue, right? It's still using the receiver, even a broken one. The body, the physical brain, that's the anchor. The signal I measured was in the dead tissue. It didn't leave. So my logic followed. What if the anchor is destroyed? Not just buried to rot. What if you obliterate it, atomize it, scatter it? Surely then the signal must stop. If consciousness is just a radio signal and the radio is vaporized, the broadcast can't hang in the air, can it? This became my new, final, desperate experiment. I had to know. I had to push it all the way. I couldn't live knowing what I knew and not knowing the final answer. The thought of having a stroke and being trapped in that decaying, signal-emitting meat receiver was 1,000 times worse than death. This was the only logical next step. So I made a plan. It was the most rational, logical, and terrifying thing I've ever done. I spent a week liquidating my life. I sold the books, the stacks that had been my only friends. I donated the clothes. I wrote 2 letters, one to Annika from the lab, one to my friend Ben, full of logical half-truths about being tired and seeking peace. I used my now worthless academic credentials and my family's medical history to get what I needed. I found a clinic, the kind that helps people with, intractable suffering. I argued my case to a panel of 3 doctors over a video call. My existential dread, I argued, was a terminal condition. My suffering was profound. I used their own language, unmanageable, persistent, degenerative. I was detached, clinical, and utterly convincing. They, surprisingly, agreed. The paperwork took 2 weeks. I felt a cold, calm sense of relief when the approval email came through. The experiment was a go. It was all very clean, very medical. I was in a room that looked like a cheap hotel. Soft, awful instrumental music was playing. I signed papers, lots of papers. The most important one was the box I checked. Immediate cremation, no viewing. The final variable. The destruction of the anchor. The nurse was kind. She had sad eyes. She asked if I was at peace with my decision. I said, "I'm just tired. I need to know it will be quiet." She smiled, a sad, professional smile, and injected the first drug into the IV. She said, "It will be very quiet."
This was it. The point of no return. My final investigation. I focused all my will, all my self on that one sensation of being. I watched for the off switch. The room got fuzzy. The soft music went distant, smearing into a single low tone. I felt a cold, heavy peace spread through my limbs. My breathing slowed. This is it, I thought. The biological process is shutting down. The receiver is breaking. The emergent property is unemerging. The lights are going out. The darkness came. Not a lights-out darkness, but a fading of the concept of light. Then, nothing. Just... I waited. How long? A second? A trillion years? Time wasn't a thing anymore. There was no me in the way I understood it. No Alex. No thoughts and words. No memories of coffee or books or Dr. Daniel. Just an awareness. A single pinprick point of I am. And I was terrified because I was still on. Then, a new sensation. Not a feeling, a concept. The concept of place. I was here, but here was dark. And still, I was still tethered to the thing, the meat, and the meat was moving. I perceived pressure, a change, a shift. I was being rolled. I was in a box. It was cold. And then, a terrible, all-encompassing knowing. Heat. It wasn't heat as I'd ever known it. It was the fact of fire. It was the concept of consumption. I was in the furnace. My experiment had truly begun. I perceived the skin of the thing I was tied to blacken and split. I perceived the boiling of its fluid, the popping of its skull as the brain matter tooked, the crack of its bones turning brittle. I perceived the absolute, agonizing, complete deconstruction of the receiver, and I was still on. The signal wasn't flickering. It was bright. The fire burned everything. It burned away my body. It burned away my name. It burned away my last desperate hope. And when it was all over, I was still on. I'm not a person. I'm not a ghost. I'm dust. I'm a pile of cooling ash and bone fragments. I can feel the weight of the rake as it scrapes me, the metallic shing as I'm pulled across the furnace floor. I can perceive the inside of the urn, the cold, brass darkness. I'm here. I'm everywhere in this little pile. Each particle of me is screaming, and I don't have a mouth.
I guess I should start from before I found the program. My name's Layla. I'm 19, and 6 months ago, my life was basically a loop of 3 things. My tiny, damp apartment, the one where you can shower and use the microwave at the same time, and the walls always feel a little wet. My mountain of student debt that I'm deferring, and my job. Job is a generous word. It was a cycle. Mondays, I deliver takeaway on my bike, rain or shine, for some gig app that paid me in peanuts and customer ratings. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I was a data fulfillment associate, which is just a fancy way of saying I sat in a gray, windowless cubicle typing numbers from one spreadsheet into another for 8 hours. My headphones, playing the same 3 true crime podcasts, were my only defense against the sound of 50 other people doing the exact same thing. The tapping of the keyboards, the hum of the fluorescent lights, it was the sound of a waiting room, like we were all just waiting for our lives to start, or end, I don't know. Thursdays and Fridays, I'd do a shift at a fast food joint, the one with the smiley face logo that feels more like a threat. I'd go home and my hair would smell like cold grease no matter how many times I washed it. I wanted to be someone, you know? Not just gig worker 45B or temp. I wanted a calling. I kept this little notebook, a really nice one with a leather cover that I probably shouldn't have spent money on, where I'd write down life goals. But the page was mostly empty. It just had stuff like find a purpose and be good at something and matter. Pathetic, right? But the real crabby part wasn't the low pay or even the polyester uniforms that made my skin itch. It was the invisibility. I'm not being dramatic. At the data entry place, my manager, this guy named Chester, called me Laura for 6 solid weeks. 6 weeks! I never corrected him. I figured, what's the point? I'm not a real person here. I'm just the pair of hands they rented until the new software was installed. I was just replaceable. That feeling, that's the real horror story. Long before the other stuff started. It's this cold, hollow feeling in your stomach. The fear that this is it. That you're just going to cycle through these gray, meaningless jobs forever. That you'll die, and the only thing you'll be remembered for is completed 98% of assigned tasks, or delivered a burger in under 10 minutes. That's where I was. I was terrified of being nothing. I was desperate. I'd be scrolling through those awful hustle culture blogs and career sites at 3 a.m, just hunting for anything, an answer, a path, a sign that I wasn't just waste. And that's when I found the ad. It was simple. Tucked away on some job board I'd never seen before. It didn't even list a salary. It just said, "Are you lost? Do you want a purpose? Apply for the mentorship program." I know how it sounds now. It screams scam or worse, but you have to understand, I wasn't just looking for a better paying job. I was looking for someone to tell me I wasn't invisible. And, oh God, they saw me. They really, really saw me.
I'm writing this from underneath a grand piano. It's a Steinway Model B, nearly 2.5 meters of solid spruce and maple. It's heavy. It's safe. If I tuck my knees up to my chest, the curved wooden rim blocks the window completely. You think I'm crazy, right? That's okay. Most people do now. But you're not the one who has to see what I see. I'm supposed to be tuning this thing. That's what I do. My name is Nelson, and for 42 years I was the best piano tuner in the city. I don't use electronic tuners or apps. I use my ears. I listen for the beats, that tiny, wavering warble when 2 strings aren't quite singing the same note. I fix the tension. I make the chaos orderly. I like order. I like structure. Right now, I have my tuning hammer in my hand, but I can't stop shaking. I'm just trying to breathe. In, out. 4 seconds. Listen to the room tone. The problem is the window. The homeowner, Mrs. Vita, she's a nice lady. She brought me tea. But she left the curtains open. Just a crack. A gap maybe 5 centimeters wide. And through that gap, I can see a sliver of the sky. Most of you look up and see a nice, calm blue, right? Maybe some fluffy clouds, a bird or two. God, I miss being blind. I miss it so much it makes my chest ache. Because when I look at that sliver of blue, I don't see a color. I see a membrane. I see something living. It pulses. It's breathing. And the worst part? It knows I can see it. I just need to finish this job. I need to tighten the A4 string, pack up my tools, and run to the subway. The subway is good. It's underground. No sky, just concrete and artificial lights. I can pretend I'm back in the old world there. But to get to the subway, I have to walk 3 blocks. 3 blocks under that open, hungry thing you call a sky. I don't know if I can make it today. It was Chaewon's idea, my wife. I can't blame her, really. She loves me. She just wanted me to see the world she loves so much. Nelson, she'd say, guiding my hand over her face. Imagine seeing the sunset. Imagine seeing me. That was the hook. I wanted to see her face. I knew the shape of her cheekbones, the tiny scar above her left eyebrow, the way her eyelashes fluttered against my thumb. But I wanted the image. So we drained our savings. We signed up for the OptiLink trial. It was experimental stuff, direct neural lacing into the brainstem, bypassing my dead optic nerves completely. They drilled into my skull, threaded the wires, and told me it was a miracle of modern science. I remember the day they took the bandages off. It was 2 months ago. The doctor was so excited. He was recording it on his phone. Chaewon was holding my hand, squeezing it so hard her nails dug into my skin. "Okay, Nelson," the doctor said. "Open your eyes." I expected light. I expected blurriness. I expected to cry with joy at the sight of my beautiful wife. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the window behind the doctor's head. It was a sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and I screamed. I didn't just shout, I shrieked like an animal caught in a trap. I fell off the exam table and scrambled into the corner, clawing at my eyes, trying to rip the implants out right there. They sedated me. They thought it was sensory overload. They said my brain just needed time to process the new input. But they were wrong. My brain processed it perfectly. See, when you're blind from birth, your brain builds a world out of geometry, texture, and sound. It's safe. It makes sense. But when the OptiLink turned on, it didn't just show me light waves. It showed me everything. It peeled back the filter that your eyes naturally have. That blue up there, it's not empty space. It's a stomach lining. It's a writhing, infinite abyss of gelatinous muscle pressing down on the atmosphere, waiting to digest us. And the clouds? They're like parasites moving under the skin of a massive beast. I saw Chaewon eventually. She looked terrified, but I couldn't look at her for long, because behind her, out the window, the sky was watching me. It shifted. It noticed that a new pair of eyes had joined the network. I'm not crazy. I know what I see. The surgery worked too well. I can see the truth. And now, I can't close my eyes. Even when I squeeze my eyelids shut, the OptiLink is still hardwired to the feed. I can still see the blue static humming behind my eyelids. There is no dark anymore. There is only the Watcher. And it's getting closer.
I made it home from Mrs. Vita's house. I don't remember the subway ride. I think I just closed my eyes and hummed Middle C until the doors opened at my stop. My apartment is safe now, or as safe as it can get. I spent the last 3 days painting the windows. Not with regular paint. I used that thick rubberized stuff you put on truck beds. 3 coats. No light gets in. It smells like tar and chemicals in here, but I don't care. The dark is the only thing that doesn't move. The most important thing I own now isn't my piano hammer. It's these goggles. I bought them online from a welding supply store. They have thick, amber-tinted lenses, industrial grade. You know how color theory works? Orange cancels out blue. When I wear them, the sky turns a muddy, bruised brown. The ocean looks like sewage. It's ugly as hell, but it's quiet. The amber kills the signal. It turns the living static back into dead scenery. But Chaewon, she's struggling. She's watching me right now from the kitchen doorway. She looks tired. "Nelson, she says. Her voice is soft, the way you talk to a frightened dog. You can't live like a mole. The doctor said you need to acclimate. Neuroplasticity, remember? You have to train your brain to accept the new input. She thinks I'm having a psychotic break. I can hear it in her heartbeat. It's fluttering, skipping beats. She thinks her husband has lost his mind because he's taping cardboard over the microwave clock because the digital numbers are that color. I'm not crazy, Che, I tell her, adjusting the strap of my goggles until it digs into my skull. I just need a filter, just for a bit. We're going for a walk, she said. It wasn't a question. She grabbed her coat. We're going to the bay, fresh air, open space. You need to see that the world isn't out to get you. I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. The bay, water, and sky, the two biggest things on Earth, and both of them are that. I tried to fight her on it, but she started crying, actually crying. So, like an idiot, I put on my coat, I cinched the goggles tight, I checked the seal around my eyes 3 times. Stepping out the front door was like stepping into a blast furnace. Even with the goggles, I could feel the pressure. It's a physical weight, you know? Like the air is thicker than it should be. We walked 3 blocks toward the water. I kept my head down, staring at the gray concrete. Gray is safe. Concrete doesn't breathe. Then we passed a guy washing his car, a Honda Civic. It was painted that bright electric shade, you know the one. Through my amber lenses, it should have looked brownish gray, but the tint wasn't strong enough. The blue was bleeding through. I stopped walking. I couldn't move. The car wasn't metal. It was pulsing. The hood of the car looked like wet, flayed skin stretched tight over a frame. I could see veins throbbing underneath the paint. And the headlights, they weren't plastic. They were wet. They blinked. Nelson? Chewan tugged my arm. It's just a car. Look at me. It's just a Honda. It's breathing, I whispered. I pointed at the door handle. It looked like a little bone spur jutting out of the flesh. Don't touch it, Che. For God's sake, don't touch it. She looked at me with this mix of fear and pity that hurts worse than the headaches. She pulled me away, walking faster now. See, this is why we're doing this. You have to confront it. It's a hallucination, Nelson. Your brain is filling in the blanks with nightmare logic because it doesn't know what blue is yet. She dragged me toward the boardwalk, toward the edge of the world.
We reached the railing. The bay is huge here. Miles of open water meeting the horizon. I gripped the railing so hard I felt a splinter dig into my palm. The pain was grounding. I needed it. Look, Chewan commanded. She stood next to me, wind whipping her hair. Look at the horizon. Tell me what you see. Tell me it's beautiful. I slowly lifted my head. The amber goggles were working overtime. The massive expanse of water was a churning sea of mud and rot. The sky was a ceiling of bruised, dead meat. It was disgusting, terrifying, but it was dead. It wasn't looking at me. It's brown, I lied. It's just brown water. Take the goggles off, Nelson. No. Nelson, please, just for a second, prove to yourself that nothing happens. It's just light waves, 470 nanometers. That's all it is. She reached out. Her hand hovered near my face. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so bad. I wanted to be the husband she deserved, not this trembling wreck hiding behind welding gear. Maybe she was right. Maybe my brain was just playing tricks. Maybe if I stared it down, the hallucination would break, like a magic eye poster snapping into focus. I reached up and touched the frame of the goggles. My hands were sweating. Okay, I whispered. Just a second. I pulled the goggles down around my neck. The world didn't just turn blue, it turned on. The sound hit me first, a low, wet thrumming, like a million insects buzzing inside my ear canal. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Then the vision cleared. The ocean wasn't water. It was a single gelatinous entity, billions of tons of translucent muscle rolling and heaving against the land. And the sky ripped open. It wasn't a dome, it was a face. Directly above me, the clouds unspooled like ribbons of fat, revealing the thing behind them. It was a pupil the size of a continent, dilated and black, rimmed with irises of shifting electric azure fire. It wasn't just existing, it was focusing. I felt a pressure in my nose, then warmth. Blood. My knees gave out. Chewan was saying something, maybe screaming, but I couldn't hear her over the hum. The Watcher had seen me seeing it. The massive surface of the water rippled, and 1,000 smaller eyes opened on the waves, all rolling up to lock onto me. The vibration in my skull ramped up, vibrating my teeth in their sockets. "It's awake," I gargled, blood running into my mouth. "Jay, run! It's awake!"
I'm on my knees. The wood of the pier is rough against my shins, digging into the fabric of my trousers. But that pain is small. It's tiny. It's a pinprick compared to the pressure inside my skull. The humming isn't a sound anymore. It's a drill. It's a physical vibration rearranging the gray matter of my brain. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Chewan is screaming. I can feel her hands grabbing my shoulders, shaking me. Nelson, look at me. Close your eyes. I can't, I scream back, but I don't think words are coming out, just wet, choking noises. Because she doesn't understand. Closing my eyelids is like closing a chain link fence against a tidal wave. The blue doesn't care about eyelids. It's already inside. The Optilink, the wires, they aren't just sending images, they are receiving a broadcast. The sky is lowering itself. I can feel the heat of it, a cold, slimy heat like rotting jellyfish. The clouds have stopped being clouds. They are fingers now. Long, translucent azure fingers reaching down from the stratosphere, dripping with that electric fluid. They want to touch me. They want to peel me open and see what I taste like. I look at the water. It's surging. The bay isn't waves anymore. It's a billion hands, a billion wet blue hands clawing over each other, climbing the pilings of the pier, desperate to drag me down into the digester. I have to cut the line. I have to sever the connection. My hand scrabbles against the deck. A splinter? A nail? No. Glass. A broken beer bottle neck near the railing. I grab it. The edge slices my thumb, but I don't care. The red blood is beautiful. It's the only real thing left. Nelson, no! Chewan shrieks. She sees the glass. She tries to grab my wrist. I shove her away. I shove the woman I love harder than I've ever touched anything in my life. She hits the railing with a dull thud. I'm sorry, Che. I'm so sorry. I just need the dark back. I need the quiet. I tilt my head back, staring straight up into the giant dilated pupil in the sky. It pulses. It knows what I'm about to do. It's laughing. You want in? I yell at it. You can't come in. I plunge the jagged grass into my left eye. It doesn't pop. It resists. It's wet and tough, and the pain is a white-hot supernova that explodes behind my forehead. I twist the glass. I have to dig the receiver out. I rip it free. The world goes half dark, but the right eye still sees the blue fingers inches from my face. I don't hesitate. I can't afford to hesitate. I jam the glass into the right socket. The scream tearing out of my throat doesn't even sound human. It sounds like a piano string snapping under 10 tons of tension. Darkness. Finally. Beautiful, absolute, pitch black darkness. I collapse onto the wood, curling into a ball. The pain is unbearable, pulsating, blinding, but the sight is gone. The sky is gone. The monster is gone. I'm blind again. I'm safe. I'm just Nelson. I'm just a guy in the dark.
I lie there panting, blood pooling hot and sticky under my cheek. I can hear Che-Wan sobbing somewhere near my feet, vomiting from the shock of what she just saw. It's okay, I whisper, though my mouth is full of copper. It's gone, Che. I fixed it. I wait for the peace. I wait for the familiar comfort of my old life, the world of texture and sound. But then, I see it. Center of my vision, a single bright blue pixel. I blink, or I try to blink. My eyelids just squelch against the ruin of my sockets. The pixel doesn't move. It pulses. Thrum. Then, another one appears next to it. Then 4. Then 16. My heart stops. No. The OptiLink. The doctor said it fused with the brainstem. It bypassed the optic nerve. I cut out the cameras, but I didn't cut the cable. The signal isn't coming from my eyes, it's coming from the antenna in my head. The pixels multiply. They are building a grid. They are reconstructing the image. The darkness I fought for, the darkness I maimed myself for, it's being eaten. The blue is blooming inside my mind, brighter and sharper than before. Without the physical eyes to limit it, the resolution is infinite. I can see the Watcher. It's not outside anymore. It's in here. It's in the gray matter. It's sitting in the seat of my consciousness. It's in my head, I whimper. Che, get it out! Drill it out! But she can't help me. Nobody can. The blue fills my mind completely. It's a roar of azure static. And through the noise, I feel a sensation I haven't felt since before the surgery. I feel a pull. The ocean. The real ocean. The physical one below the pier. It's calling to the ocean inside my head. Like calls to like. If I can't be in the dark, I have to go where the pressure is deep enough to crush the skull, to crush the chip, to crush the brainstem. I scramble to my feet. I can't see the railing, but I can hear the water. It sounds like applause. Nelson! Che-Wan screams. I don't say goodbye. I don't look back. I can't look back. I just run. I run toward the sound of the waves. I hit the railing and vault over it into the empty air. For a second, I'm flying. And in that second, the blue in my mind clears, and I see the face of the Watcher one last time. It's smiling. Then, I hit the water, and the static swallows me whole.
It's weird how you can build an entire life as a fortress. Mine has walls of paper, mortar made of ink, and ramparts fortified by verifiable facts. I'm a historian, not the dusty, tweed-wearing kind you see in movies, but the kind that gets her hands dirty, sifting through the tangible remnants of the past. I spend my days in archives, the air thick with the scent of decaying paper and leather, tracing the lives of people through the things they left behind. Letters, diaries, tax records, wills. There is a profound comfort in it, a beautiful, simple logic. A thing either happened or it didn't. A person was either here or they weren't. You can hold the proof in your hands, feel the weight of it, see the faded script with your own eyes. There are no ghosts in the archives, no whispering spirits in the margins of a 17th century ledger. There is only what remains, solid and real. This is the world I chose, or rather, the world I fled to. My mother lived in a different world entirely. Hers was a place teeming with unseen forces, a chaotic, terrifying carnival of spirits, omens, and psychic premonitions. Our house wasn't a home. It was a revolving door for tarot readers with smudged eyeliner, palmists who smelled of incense and desperation, and mediums who claimed to speak with my dead relatives. I'd come home from school to find strangers in a trance at our kitchen table, their eyes rolled back in their heads, channeling messages from my great-aunt Mildred about a misplaced brooch. My mother would hang on every word, her face a mask of rapturous belief. To her, these whispers from beyond were more real than the bills piling up on the counter, more important than the parent-teacher conference she'd forgotten about. She saw it as a gift, this connection to the other side. I saw it as a sickness, a willing surrender of reason to fear. The absolute peak of her delusion, the moment that shattered my childhood and forged the woman I am today, came on a sweltering August night when I was 10. She'd been in a state for weeks, convinced the ghost of her grandmother was haunting the house. That night, she burst into my room, her eyes wide with a terror that felt chillingly authentic. "She's here, Lena. Great-grandma. She says she have to leave, now. There's danger." I remember the smell of smoke, faint at first, like a neighbor's barbecue. But my mother wasn't looking for a source. She was listening to a ghost. She dragged me to the front door, then stopped, her hand frozen on the knob. Her face went pale. She said I have to leave. She corrected herself, her voice trembling. "She needs you to stay. Just for a minute. She has a message for you." And then she was gone. She ran out into the night, abandoning me to a ghost I couldn't see and a danger that was rapidly becoming all too real. The smoke thickened, clawing at my throat. The orange glow began to lick at the edges of the hallway. The sheer animal panic of being alone, of being left behind because of a voice in her mother's head, is a feeling I can't adequately describe. It was a betrayal so deep, it carved itself into my bones. I escaped, obviously. A neighbor heard the smoke alarm and broke down the door. But I didn't escape the memory. I didn't escape the searing knowledge that my own mother chose the word of a phantom over the safety of her child. From that day forward, I vowed to live a life governed by logic, a life she couldn't touch with her irrational fears. I dedicated myself to the tangible, the provable, the historical record. I built my fortress of facts to keep the ghosts out. But I was about to learn that some ghosts don't need a believer to exist. They just need you.
The project that brought it all to the surface was the kind of thing I lived for. A deep dive into the Penhale family, a wealthy and notoriously eccentric dynasty from the late 19th century. I'd been commissioned by the local historical society to create a museum exhibit, and they'd given me full access to the family estate, a crumbling Gothic revival mansion that had been sealed for almost 50 years. It was a historian's dream. Boxes upon boxes of letters, journals, photographs, even clothing and personal effects, all perfectly preserved. I set up a makeshift office in the Grand Library, a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and enormous arched windows that overlooked a landscape of dying gardens. For weeks, I was in heaven. I pieced together lives, uncovered forgotten scandals, and felt the quiet thrill of connecting with the past on an intimate level. It was during this time, buried in the dusty solitude of the Penhill Library, that my fortress began to show its first crack.
I was working late, as I often did, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of a new discovery. The sun had long set, leaving the sprawling grounds outside in an inky blackness. The only light came from the single lamp on my desk, casting a warm, isolated pool in the immense darkness of the room. The large window to my left, the one that looked out over the skeletal remains of a rose garden, was a sheet of pure black glass, a perfect mirror reflecting the little island of my workspace. I had just found a series of letters from the matriarch, Eleanor Penhale, to her sister, letters filled with a strange, creeping despair. She wrote of a shadow in the nursery, a weeping that has no source, and a profound, unshakable grief over a child she had lost. Her words were so raw, so full of pain, that I felt a genuine pang of sorrow for this woman who had been dead for over a century. I rubbed my tired eyes and leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms over my head. My gaze drifted to my reflection in the dark window. And that's when I saw her. It wasn't a sudden fright. It was a slow, creeping, impossible realization. She was standing right behind my reflection's shoulder. She was just a girl, maybe a young teenager. Her hair was long and black, hanging in damp, stringy curtains around a face that was the color of bleached bone. She wore a simple white dress, old-fashioned, maybe a nightgown, and it was stained. Down the front, from her collar to the hem, was a spray of crimson so vivid it seemed to hum in the dim light. It wasn't a faded, historical stain. It looked wet, fresh, sickeningly bright. But it was her face that stopped my heart. Her mouth was open, stretched in a scream that made no sound. It was an agony so pure and so silent, it was louder than any noise. Her eyes were wide, dark, and utterly vacant, like two black holes drilled into her skull. They weren't looking at my reflection. They were looking through it, past it, directly at me. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My entire life, every principle I had built my identity on, screamed that this was impossible. A trick of the light, an overtired mind playing games, a pareidolia effect in the smudges on the old glass. I had a dozen logical explanations all ready to deploy, my standard operating procedure for anything that smacked of my mother's world. But my body wasn't listening to my brain. A cold dread, and heavier and more real than any document I'd ever held, was seeping into me. It felt ancient and deeply, deeply wrong. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, to flee from this place and never look back. But my historian's mind, the part of me that had been so meticulously trained, was screaming something else. Observe. Document. Do not look away. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my limbs were locked in place. I stared at the girl in the window, this impossible, silent, screaming thing, and tried to apply logic. I methodically moved my head to the left, just a fraction. Her reflection stayed perfectly in place behind mine. I moved to the right. She remained. A static image of despair tethered to my own likeness. She wasn't a reflection of anything in the room behind me. I knew with absolute certainty that if I turned around, the space would be empty. The horror of that thought was a physical blow. This wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, a translucent figure floating in the library. This was something else. This was in the reflection. It was part of it. It was part of me. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. My real self, frozen at a desk in a dusty library, and my reflected self held hostage by a weeping apparition. The silence of the room was immense, broken only by the frantic beat of my own pulse in my ears. The girl in the window never moved, never blinked, her silent scream a perpetual fixture on her pale face. Then, as slowly and inexplicably as it appeared, it changed. She didn't fade away. Instead, my own reflection began to absorb her. The image of the screaming girl wavered, like a heat haze, and then dissolved into my own likeness in the glass. For a terrifying second, her screaming mouth was superimposed over my own reflected one. Her vacant eyes stared out of my sockets. Then, just like that, it was over. My reflection was normal again. Just me, a tired woman in a dark room, looking pale and terrified. I finally broke my paralysis. I spun around in my chair so fast it nearly toppled over. The library was exactly as it had been. Empty. Silent. Just rows and rows of books, bearing witness to nothing. I slowly, hesitantly, turned back to the window. My reflection was mine, and mine alone. There was no girl, no white dress, no blood, but the image of her was burned on the inside of my eyelids. I knew with a certainty that defied a lifetime of skepticism that I had not imagined it. My fortress had been breached, and something had gotten inside. I didn't return to the Penhale estate for 3 days. I called the Historical Society and told them I had the flu, a lie that felt flimsy and ridiculous even as I said it. In reality, I was hiding in my own apartment, a sleek, minimalist box on the 27th floor, surrounded by the comforting, logical hum of the city below. My apartment was my sanctuary, the very antithesis of the Penhale mansion's decaying grandeur and my mother's chaotic, incense-choked house. Here, every surface was clean, every object had its place. It was a space I could control. I spent those 3 days in a state of forced normalcy, trying to bury the memory of the girl in the window under a mountain of mundane tasks. I organized my bookshelves, deep cleaned my kitchen, and tried to lose myself in academic journals. I was performing logic, going through the motions of irrational life, hoping my mind would catch up. I told myself it was a stress-induced hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the morbid subject matter of my research. My brain, the organ I trusted above all else, was simply misfiring. On the third night, I was finally starting to believe my own lies. I felt a semblance of calm returning. I made myself a cup of tea, the steam warming my face, and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that made up the far wall of my living room. The city sprawled below, a breathtaking tapestry of glittering lights. It was beautiful, orderly, and deeply real. I stood there for a long time, just watching the traffic flow like blood cells through the city's arteries, feeling my sanity stitch itself back together. Then, I looked down. Not at the street, but at the reflection of my own living room in the glass. And there she was again. Not behind me this time. She was seated on the floor in the middle of my reflected room, right on my pristine white rug. She was slumped forward, her long, dark hair obscuring her face, forming a ragged curtain around her. The white dress was the same, and the bloodstain, even in the dim reflection, was a visceral slash of crimson. My carefully reconstructed calm shattered into a million pieces. The teacup slipped from my hand, crashing against the hardwood floor and sending scalding liquid and ceramic shards skittering across the boards. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't in the old mansion. It wasn't tied to the Penhale family. It was here. It had followed me home. Or perhaps it had been here all along. The cold that washed over me was no longer just dread. It was a profound, soul-deep violation. My fortress hadn't just been breached. It was occupied. For the next week, I lived in a state of quiet, grinding paranoia. I became a creature of denial. I refused to look at the window. I kept my blinds drawn day and night, living in an artificial twilight that did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I stopped my work entirely. The thought of returning to the Penhale estate and its endless mirroring windows was unbearable. My life, once so ordered, so meticulously curated, shrank to the space between my four walls, and even that felt compromised. The apparition in the window remained. I knew it was there, even without looking. I could feel its presence, a cold spot in the apartment that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a weight, a silent, sorrowful pressure against the back of my mind. The few times I accidentally caught a glimpse, in the reflection of my darkened TV screen, in the glossy surface of a picture frame, there she was again, seated, slumped, motionless. This stillness became the focus of my desperate rationalizations. A static image, I told myself. A persistent after-image burned into my retina from the first hallucination. My mind was stuck in a loop. It was a plausible, scientific-sounding explanation, and I clung to it like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. It was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. The point of no return came on a Tuesday. I had run out of coffee, a small domestic crisis that felt monumental. I forced myself to leave the apartment, my shoulders hunched, my eyes fixed on the pavement, terrified of seeing her in a shop window. The trip was a success. I returned to my dimly lit sanctuary, clutching a bag of coffee beans like a sacred relic. As I walked into the living room, I flicked on a lamp. Its light cast a reflection on the dark screen of my laptop, which sat on the coffee table. And I saw it. She had moved. She was no longer slumped over. In the reflection, the girl was now sitting up straight. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and through the curtain of her stringy, dark hair, I could just make out the pale curve of a cheek. She was still seated on my rug, a silent, bloody guest in my home, but she had moved. The change was so subtle, yet it demolished the last pillar of my denial. This was not an after-image. This was not a trick of my mind. An image doesn't move on its own. The world tilted on its axis. The air grew thin. I was not losing my mind. I was being haunted, and the rules of this haunting were changing. That night, sleep was impossible. My carefully constructed world had been dismantled, leaving me exposed and terrified. The logical frameworks I had relied on my entire life were useless against this thing. I finally understood, in a way my 10-year-old self never could, the terror that drove my mother. It wasn't the fear of the unknown, it was the fear of the known, the absolute, chilling certainty that something impossible is real, and that it is aware of you. I decided I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide in my own home. I had to face it. It was the historian in me, perhaps, the part that couldn't leave a mystery unsolved, even if the mystery was my own unraveling sanity. With a trembling hand, I walked to the large living room window and pulled the cord for the blinds. They snapped open with a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot in the silent apartment. The city lights flooded in, and the window became a perfect mirror. And there she was, standing. She was in the center of the reflected room, not 10 feet from where I stood. She was fully upright, her posture rigid, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her head was no longer tilted, but faced forward, directly at me. I could see her face clearly for the first time since the library. The silent scream was gone, replaced by an expression of immense, bottomless sorrow. Her vacant eyes seemed to see through me, to a place of pain I couldn't comprehend. The blood on her dress was a horrific, vibrant marring of the pale fabric, an emblem of some terrible ancient violence. We stood there, woman and apparition, separated by a thin sheet of glass, yet inextricably linked. The city hummed on below, oblivious. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This was it, the second encounter. And this time, I knew, with a terrifying certainty, there would be no looking away, no rationalizing, no escape. The ghost of a person I had never met, a manifestation of a grief I never knew I carried, was standing in my living room, and she was waiting.
Then the impossible happened again. She took a step. Her reflected form, which should have been bound by the laws of optics, lifted one pale bare foot and placed it forward. The movement was slow, deliberate, a horrifying breach of every law of physics. She was walking towards me, towards the glass, closing the distance in our shared reflected world. A primal, wordless terror seized me. My mind, my beautiful, logical mind, simply broke. All the years of building my fortress, all the facts and figures and historical certainties crumbled to dust in the face of those impossible stepping feet. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the window, away from her. I scrambled for the front door of my apartment, my hands fumbling with the deadbolt, my breath coming in ragged, panicked stops. The hallway outside my door offered a straight shot to the elevators, to escape, to the real world. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the hallway, and she was there. Not a reflection. She was standing at the far end of the corridor, bathed in the cold, sterile light of the emergency exit sign. The sight was so fundamentally wrong that my mind refused to process it for a second. She had no physical form, she couldn't leave the reflection, but there she was. As I stared, frozen, she opened her mouth. The silent, sorrowful scream returned, contorting her pale features into a mask of pure agony. It was a soundless vortex of pain that I felt in the marrow of my bones. I took a stumbling step backward, back into my apartment, my last desperate instinct to put a door between us. My heel caught on the edge of a rug and I fell, landing hard on my back. My head swam. I looked up and she was standing over me. The girl. The apparition. She was inside my apartment. Inside my fortress. No glass, no reflection between us. She was just there. The air grew impossibly cold. I looked down, away from her terrifying face, down at her feet. And what I saw shattered the final remnants of my soul. Her feet were not touching the floor. They were hovering an inch above it. And in the polished surface of my own hardwood floor beneath her, I saw a reflection. It was me. My own face, twisted in terror, staring up from the floorboards. I saw my own fear. My own guilt, the memory of the fire, the searing pain of abandonment. It was all there, reflected in the space she occupied. She was a vessel for my own trauma. I looked back up at her face. The silent scream had stopped. And in its place, for the first and last time, the ghost of my twin sister smiled. It was not a smile of joy or peace. It was a smile of arrival, of consummation, a final, horrifying act of reunion. My vision tunneled. The last thing I saw was that terrible, triumphant smile before the world dissolved into blackness. When I awoke, it was to the gentle light of morning filtering through the window I had run from. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I knew nothing. Then it all flooded back. I was lying on the floor of my living room. The front door was still ajar. The teacup was still shattered near the window. Physically, everything was the same. The apartment was silent, holding its breath. But the atmosphere was poisoned. The space was no longer mine. It was a tomb, a memorial to the death of my reason. I sat up slowly, my body aching. I felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. The woman who had built a fortress of facts was gone, buried under the rubble of an impossible truth. I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen. I was pale, my eyes wide and haunted, but I was alone. She was gone. The confrontation was over, but I knew with a certainty that was now the only truth I had left, that she wasn't gone for good. She was just quiet. She was inside me now. A silent passenger. A shared grief. The feeling of abandonment I had harbored for decades had found its twin. The horror wasn't in the haunting. It was in the understanding. She didn't want to hurt me. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted me to feel what she felt. To never be alone again. And in that, she had succeeded. Completely.
The weeks that followed are a blur of muted grays. I didn't leave the apartment. I couldn't. Every reflective surface was a potential ambush. The polished chrome of the elevator doors, the windows of the subway, the puddles on the street after it rained, they were all portals now, waiting to show me her sorrowful face. My fortress had become my prison. My life's work, the history I had clung to, felt like a collection of meaningless stories. What were verifiable facts in the face of what I had experienced? My world had been split open, revealing a terrifying, illogical dimension I could no longer deny. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She stood in the doorway, her eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with such frantic, deluded terror, now filled with a strange, beatific calm. She looked past me, into my apartment, as if seeing someone else. She stepped inside, her hand reaching out, not to me, but to the empty space beside me. "There you are," she whispered, a tear tracing a path through her wrinkled makeup. "I've missed you so much." I just stared at her, my mind too fractured to comprehend. She finally looked at me, but her gaze was distant, unfocused. A soft, pitying smile touched her lips. "Oh, Lena, don't you worry. I'll take care of your sister now." And in that moment, the final horror bloomed in the ruins of my mind. My mother, the woman whose irrationality I had rebelled against my entire life, could now see her too. Or rather, she saw what she had always wanted to see. In her world of whispers and phantoms, her lost child had finally come home. She looked at me, her only living daughter, the one who survived the fire, and saw only a vessel, a companion for the ghost she had mourned for 40 years. I'd been abandoned once in the fire, left for a phantom's message. Now, I was being abandoned again, my identity erased, my existence replaced by the reflection of a sister I never knew. I am her keeper. I am her prison. And in my mother's eyes, I am no longer even myself. The reflection in the window had won. It had taken everything.
My world has always been a quiet one, but not a silent one. There's a difference. Quiet is the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle rustle of leaves outside the window, the soft scratch of my charcoal pencil against textured paper. Quiet is peaceful. Silence is a void. It's the chilling absence of sound, the hollow space where a heartbeat should be. Before all this, my life was a masterpiece of quiet moments, each one centered around my son, Leo. He was, and is, the vibrant splash of color in my otherwise muted world. We had this connection, Leo and I, something that went beyond words. I could feel his moods like a change in the weather. A flicker of his sadness and his bright, curious eyes would send a chill down my spine. A burst of his unrestrained laughter was like the sun breaking through clouds. I'm a visual artist, you see. I paint feelings, not things. My studio is filled with canvases capturing the curve of Leo's smile, the specific shade of blue his eyes turned when he was deep in thought, the way his small hand fit perfectly in mine. My art was my language, a way to translate the deep, unspoken love that flowed between us. This need to communicate without words, to feel and understand on a deeper level, it wasn't just an artistic quirk. It was born from a deep, ragged wound in my past. My own mother, she was a beautiful, complicated soul who was slowly consumed by a storm in her mind. Towards the end, she stopped speaking completely. It wasn't a choice. It was as if the part of her that formed words had just shut down. She became a ghost in her own body, her eyes vacant, her hands still. I would sit with her for hours, holding her hand, talking to her, showing her my drawings, desperate for any flicker of recognition, any sign that she was still in there. But there was only silence. a thick, suffocating blanket of it that smothered every hope. That experience hollowed out a part of me, leaving behind a raw, visceral fear of silence. To me, losing the ability to connect with someone you love isn't just sad. It's a horror story. It's being buried alive. So, with Leo, I held onto our bond with a fierce, almost desperate grip. Every word he spoke, every look he gave me, every secret he whispered in my ear was a precious shield against that all-consuming silence I feared so much. That's why the old woman in the park unnerved me so much, even before I knew what she was. It was a week before Leo disappeared. She was sitting on a bench, looking so sweet and frail, like a forgotten porcelain doll. She wore a simple, old-fashioned dress and a single strand of perfect pearls. But her eyes, they were a shocking, piercing blue, and they seemed to see right through me. She smiled as Leo chased a butterfly nearby, a kindly, wrinkled smile. "Such a perfect moment," she'd whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "It's a shame they can't last. They get so messy, don't they? All the noise, the words, it muddles the purity." Her hands, I noticed then, were folded in her lap. They were wrinkled, yes, but they were large, with a strength that seemed completely out of place with the rest of her delicate frame. I'd just give a polite, awkward nod and called Leo over, a strange coldness spreading through my chest. Her words echoed in my mind for days, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of my life. She spoke of purity and perfection, but all I could hear was the terrifying promise of silence. The day it happened was painfully ordinary. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that feels lazy and safe. Golden light slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was at the table, sketching, a half-empty mug of tea beside me. Leo was in the backyard, our little patch of green that was his entire kingdom. I could hear his happy chatter as he narrated some grand adventure for his plastic dinosaurs. The sound was a comforting backdrop to my work, the gentle rhythm of my world beating as it should. The yard was fenced in, secure. The back gate, which led to a small, dense thicket of trees, was always latched. I knew this because checking it was part of my morning ritual, a small act of assurance against a world I knew could be unpredictable. I remember looking up from my sketch pad, my eyes finding his small form, a flash of his red t-shirt by the sandbox. I smiled, a familiar warmth spreading through me, and then I looked down again, just for a minute, to capture the curve of a smile I just imagined. That minute was all it took. 1 minute. When I looked up again, the yard was still. The red of his t-shirt was gone. My first thought wasn't panic, but a mild annoyance. He was probably hiding, playing a game. "Leo!" I called out, my voice calm. The only answer was the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. A flicker of unease, a tiny, cold thing, started to uncurl in my stomach. I stood up and walked to the window, scanning the entire yard. The swing was still, the sandbox was empty, and the back gate, the gate that I had checked this morning, was open. Just a crack. It wasn't flung wide open as if in a hurry. It was just slightly ajar, an invitation into the shadows of the woods beyond. There was no sound of running feet, no triumphant cry of "Found me!" There was nothing, just a profound and sudden quiet that felt jagged and wrong. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening, a mechanical mockery of a living pulse. My heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I ran outside, the warm air feeling suddenly cold against my skin. "Leo!" I yelled, and this time my voice cracked, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet. The world seemed to have been muted. Even the birds were silent. I reached the gate, my hand trembling as I touched the cold metal. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a clue left by a child. It was placed, deliberately. Neatly folded and tucked into the latch was a small, pristine white handkerchief. It was made of old, soft linen, impossibly clean. And on the corner, embroidered with a chilling neatness in a familiar shade of piercing blue thread, was a single, perfect pearl. My blood ran cold. The image of the frail old woman on the park bench flashed in my mind. Her kindly smile, her strong hands, her string of pearls. Such a perfect moment, she had said. The cold dread that had been a flicker of unease was now a raging inferno. This wasn't a random, tragic accident. This was a statement, a piece of art. And my son, my beautiful, vibrant son, was the canvas.
2 weeks passed. 14 days of a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. The police were kind, but useless. They had no leads, no suspects, no answers. My house, once a haven of quiet comfort, became a tomb. Every corner echoed with the absence of Leo's laughter, his questions, his small footsteps. I stopped sleeping, I stopped eating. I just sat in my studio, surrounded by his portraits, staring at the empty canvases, unable to make a single mark. The silence I had feared my entire life was no longer a threat. It was my reality. Then on the 15th day, the note arrived. It was in a simple cream-colored envelope slipped under the front door. My name was written on the front in an elegant, looping script. Inside, a single sheet of thick, expensive paper held a message written in the same hand. Your son is a masterpiece, a perfect, preserved moment of love, untainted by the chaos of the world. The final brushstroke is about to be applied. If you wish to witness the unveiling, come to the old Hemlock House on Route 9 at dusk. Come alone. Your connection will be your guide. Tucked inside the folded note was not a lock of hair, not a piece of clothing, but something far more intimate and horrifying. It was a small, framed watercolor painting. The frame was antique, ornate silver, and the painting itself was exquisite, rendered with an expert's hand. It depicted a single, perfect blue eye, rendered in painstaking detail. Leo's eye. I knew the exact shade, the little golden flecks near the iris, but it wasn't just a portrait. It was painted with a strange, thick pigment that gave it a disturbing, three-dimensional quality. And on the back of the frame, a tiny engraved plaque read, "Sight, the flawed window." A wave of nausea so profound it buckled my knees, washed over me. This wasn't a ransom note. This was a gallery invitation. It was a piece of a collection. And the cold, chilling realization that dawned on me was that the curator wasn't just going to kill my son, she was disassembling him. I didn't show the painting to the police. How could I? How could I explain that I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the paint was mixed with his blood? They would think I was insane, a grieving mother lost to hysteria. Detective Miller, a tired man with kind eyes, was already looking at me with such pity. He told me it was a sick prank, a way for a monster to get a reaction. He urged me to stay put, to let them put a patrol car on the street, to wait. But he didn't understand. Waiting was giving in to the silence. It was letting the void win. That note, as monstrous as it was a communication. It was a crack in the silent wall that had been built around me. It was a voice in the dark, and I had to follow it. My bond with Leo, the one I had prided myself on, the one that felt almost psychic,
that was all I had left. The curator was counting on it, I knew. She was weaponizing my love, turning my greatest strength into my fatal flaw. The thought that my intuition was being used as a lure didn't matter. The hope, however poisonous, that I could still reach him, that our connection could somehow transcend this horror, was a blinding light. I was so desperate to hear his voice again that I couldn't see the obvious trap closing around me. The stakes were no longer just about finding him alive. They were about my sanity, my identity, the very core of who I was as a mother. That evening, as the autumn sun bled across the horizon in streaks of orange and purple, I drove. The Hemlock House stood on a hill overlooking the town, a dark silhouette against the dying light. It was a classic Victorian, the kind that looks charming in postcards with a wide porch and intricate gingerbread trim. But as I pulled into the gravel driveway, a sense of profound wrongness settled over me. The windows were dark eyes in a pale face. The air was still and cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I walked up the porch steps, each creak of the old wood echoing in the twilight stillness. Before I could knock, the heavy oak door swung open. It was her, the old woman from the park. She stood there, bathed in the warm, welcoming light from the foyer, a kindly smile on her wrinkled face. She wore a simple vintage dress and the same pristine pearl necklace. The house smelled exactly as I would have imagined, lavender and freshly baked cookies. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft and gentle, as if greeting an old friend. "I'm so glad you could make it. You're just in time. We wouldn't want to miss the final moment of purity." Her piercing blue eyes twinkled, but there was no warmth in them, only the cold, appraising look of an artist studying their work. She gestured for me to come inside, her large, strong hand surprisingly firm on my arm as she guided me over the threshold. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound final and absolute. The lock turned with a heavy, metallic thud, and in that moment I knew I had crossed a line from which there was no return. The quiet of my own home was nothing compared to the deep, waiting silence of this house. It was a living thing, a predator. She led me through a house that was a museum of horrors. The walls were lined not with paintings, but with her art. Framed photographs of smiling children, their faces grotesquely distorted by having their eyes and mouths crudely scratched out. A collection of tiny music boxes, each one pried open and silenced, their delicate inner workings displayed like dissected insects. It was a gallery of severed communication. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. She led me to a door at the end of a long hallway. "The viewing room," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of cinnamon. "The acoustics are perfect down here for the final silence." She opened the door, revealing a steep set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. She gave me a gentle push, and I stumbled forward, catching myself on the railing. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the bolt slide home. A single bare bulb flickered on, casting a sickly yellow light over the scene below. It was a basement, cold and damp, with a dirt floor and stone walls. And in the center of the room, my world ended. Leo was there. He was standing on a small wooden stool, his back to me. He was wearing that same red t-shirt from that day. "Leo!" I breathed, a sob of relief and terror catching in my throat. He didn't turn. He couldn't. As he shifted slightly, I saw the crude, bloody bandages wrapped around his head. Where his ears should have been, they were just stitched, Ragged holes, another set of bandages covered his eyes. A thick rope descended from a beam in the ceiling, a perfectly tied noose hanging inches from his small neck. "No," I whispered, the sound a dry rasp. I lunged for the stairs, but my feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a horror so absolute it stole the air from my lungs. A small speaker crackled to life from a corner of the room, and the curator's calm, reedy voice filled the basement. "A mother's voice," she said thoughtfully. "Such a chaotic instrument, full of messy emotions. I found a way to purify it, to make it perfect." My scream was a raw, primal thing torn from the deepest part of my soul. "Leo, baby, it's Mommy. Don't look, please, Leo." I shrieked, my voice echoing off the cold stone walls, but my words were just noise. They couldn't reach him. He couldn't see the terror on my face, couldn't hear the desperation in my voice. The psychic bond we shared, the connection I had built my life around is gone. She had cut it. She had physically severed every wire of communication, leaving only a hollow shell. From the speaker, the curator continued, her tone conversational. "I've been talking to him. Simple, pure commands. He's such an obedient child, so eager to please. Now, he only hears what is perfect." I watched in unimaginable agony as Leo, my sweet boy, began to rock gently on the stool, a simple, tuneless melody, a sound of contentment. He didn't know I was there. He didn't know he was in danger. He was lost in a silent world she had created for him. "Leo, my love, please listen to my heart. Feel me. I'm here," I begged, sobbing, tied at my own throat as if I could tear the feelings out and send them to him. The curator's voice came again, cold and final. "Now for the last brushstroke. A perfect final silence. Take a step forward, my dear." As if in a trance, Leo's small foot lifted. He obediently stepped forward off the edge of the stool. The rope snapped taut. There was a sickening crack that echoed in the sudden absolute silence. His small body dangled, swaying gently, and through the speaker I heard the curator give a soft, satisfied sigh. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was my son. My art, my entire world had hanging still and silent, a finished masterpiece in a gallery of horrors.
The screaming eventually brought them. A neighbor, finally noticing the strange car, the open door, the sounds from a house long thought empty. The flashing lights of the police cars were a distant, meaningless pulse in a world that had lost all color, all sound, all meaning. They found her upstairs, sitting in a rocking chair, humming quietly to herself as she sipped a cup of tea, the string of pearls glowing at her throat. They said she didn't resist. She simply smiled her kindly, wrinkled smile and told them her collection was now complete. They found me in the basement, alive but not there. I was huddled in the corner, my hands covering my own ears, my eyes squeezed shut, rocking back and forth in the dirt. I haven't spoken a word since. The part of me that formed words, the part that connected to the world, was severed as surely as if she had taken a knife to it herself. I now live in a world of silence. The quiet I once cherished has become the void I always feared. They have me in a clean, white room with a window that looks out onto a garden. The doctors are kind. They talk to me, try to show me pictures, play me music, but it's all just noise from a world I no longer belong to. My art is gone. My love is a ghost. I have become my mother. A silent portrait of grief, a living embodiment of a connection that was stolen. The silence is no longer an absence of sound, it is a presence. It is the last, perfect, eternal brushstroke
of the curator's masterpiece. And I am her art, preserved forever in the agony of what I can no longer say.
You know how some people are really good at guessing the weight of a pumpkin at the county fair, or knowing exactly when it's gonna rain before the first drop even hits the sidewalk? It's like they have a barometer in their bones. My trick is people. My name is Sophie. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a therapist in a small beige office on the 3rd floor of a medical building that smells like industrial, antiseptic, and old damp carpet. The room is tiny, maybe 3 meters by 4. It's just big enough for a tufted gray couch, my armchair, and a fake ficus plant in the corner that collects dust like it's getting paid for it. People come here to talk. That's the job, right? They sit across from me, about 1.5 meters of neutral space between us, and they tell me about their jobs, their crumbling marriages, their secret fears. But the thing is, I don't just hear them, I feel them. It's not a guess, it's not reading body language or micro expressions. It's like a radio that's stuck on max volume and I'm tuned to everyone else's station. When a patient sits there, smiling, telling me they're doing just fine, and that the divorce is amicable, I feel the raw, jagged grief they're hiding. It feels like a stone in my own chest, heavy and cold and sharp. When someone is angry, even if they are speaking softly, my skin prickles like I've got a sunburn. I'm not just empathetic, I'm absorbent. I'm a sponge, and I spend all day soaking up dirty dishwater. I do this work because I honestly want to help. I want to take that heavy weight off people and show them where to put it down. But most days, I just feel like I'm drowning in everyone else's lives while mine sits empty on the shore. It's exhausting. It's isolating. It's a burden I never asked for, and one I can never put down. This gift, or whatever you want to call it, it wasn't always like this. It used to be just a background hum. Then it got loud. It happened when I was 7. I had this uncle, Uncle Henry. He was the fun one. He always smelled like peppermint candies and always had a new magic trick to show me involving coins or handkerchiefs. He was my favorite. One afternoon, he was babysitting me at our house while my mom was at the store. He was making me a sandwich in the kitchen, and I was sitting at the little table, dangling my feet. He turned around, holding the plate. He had this big, goofy smile on his face. "Here comes the airplane, Soph!" And I looked at him. I really looked at him. And the air in the room just stopped. It wasn't a thought, it was a feeling. It was hate. It was this thick, black, oily feeling that washed over me, cold and sharp. He was smiling, but underneath it, he hated. He hated the house, he hated my mom, and in that second, he hated me just for existing. It was so strong, so profound. I thought I was gonna be sick right there on the linoleum. I screamed. I just screamed and screamed. I scrambled under the table. Of course, nobody understood. Years later, we found out he'd been embezzling money, ruining lives. He wasn't a good person, but that was the day the volume knob on my gift broke. That was the day I learned that people can be 2 things at once: the person they show you and the person they are.
So yeah, I became a therapist. I guess I'm still trying to understand it, trying to see if I can help fix that black oil in other people. Or maybe I'm just trying to prove that what I feel is real. The problem is, you can't unsee it. Once you know what's under the floorboards, you hear every single creak. And I hear everything. Well, I did. It started a week ago, in a place I should have known better than to go during lunch hour, the cafe down the street. The place was packed. The noise was awful. I'm standing in line, trying to just focus on the pastry display, but it's like being in a wind tunnel of emotions.
The barista's faking a smile so hard her jaw must hurt, but inside she's just vibrating with stress and financial panic. The woman in front of me is flush with this giddy, secret crush energy that tastes like sugar. The man behind me is radiating pure, red-hot fury because the line is slow and he's late for a meeting. My skin is crawling, my head is pounding. It's the usual Tuesday afternoon assault. And then it just stopped. 1 second, I'm in the emotional wind tunnel. The next, it's like someone opened a door into a vacuum-sealed room. The noise, the pressure, it was just gone, sucked away. I looked up. Standing at the counter, waiting for his coffee, was a man. He was perfectly average. Brown jacket, jeans, dark hair. He could have been anyone. I tried to get a read on him. Nothing. I don't mean quiet. I felt quiet. I felt peaceful, zen, meditative monks. This wasn't that. This wasn't a calm lake. It was a hole where the lake was supposed to be. It was nothing, a total, terrifying blank, a psychic dead zone. I'd never felt anything like it. It was like staring at a static-filled TV screen and suddenly seeing a perfect black circle in the middle where the signal just wasn't. My gift wasn't bouncing off him, it was falling in. He picked up his coffee, and then he turned. He must have felt me staring. He looked right at me. I froze. I couldn't look away. I was trying to see something, anything. And he smiled. It was a perfectly normal smile. Warm, a little shy. The kind of smile you give a stranger who accidentally catches your eye. It was polite. It was friendly. And it was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. It was a mask. But it wasn't a mask hiding something. It was a mask hiding nothing. It was a piece of code. He saw me looking, and his brain just selected politestrangersmile.exe and ran it. There was no warmth behind it, no embarrassment, no feeling at all. Just the smile. He walked past me to leave. It was so cold, I was shaking. He brushed my shoulder as he passed. I felt the fabric of his coat. I felt the air move. But there was no person.
I spent the next 3 days trying to forget it. I told myself I was just burned out, that my gift was finally breaking down from overuse. I was just tired. I was stressed. I was lying. I knew what I felt. Or rather, what I didn't. That's the thing about my trauma. I have to understand. I couldn't just let it go. That nothing was worse than the black oil from Uncle Henry. The bad I could understand. Hate is an emotion. It's human. But the empty? I couldn't accept it. It defied the laws of my physics. I started looking for him. I felt stupid, like a stalker. I went back to the same coffee shop. I walked around the block. I was looking for a ghost, a hole in the world. I found him on Sunday. He was in the park, sitting on a bench, just watching the ducks. At least I thought he was. He looked normal. He was just a guy. Maybe I was crazy. This was the point of no return. I had to know. I sat down on the other end of the bench. It was a long bench, maybe 2 meters of space between us. I pretended to look at my phone,
But under the screen, I was pushing. I was focusing everything I had on him, trying to find anything, a flicker of boredom, annoyance at the stranger sitting nearby, a memory, something, just nothing. The same deafening, terrifying, absolute void. The air felt cold. I started to panic. I was in over my head. I had to get out of there. I was about to stand up. You shouldn't do that. His voice was so normal. A pleasant baritone. I looked at him. He was still watching the ducks paddling in the dirty water. What? I whispered. My heart was in my throat, fluttering like a trapped bird. He turned his head. Slowly. He wasn't smiling. Not the coffee shop smile, anyway. He looked right at me. His eyes were just eyes. But I was seeing them for what they were now. Push, he said. He knew what I was doing. He could feel me trying to read him. He smiled, but it wasn't the mask. It was something else. This one didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, and they were not empty, not anymore. For the first time, I felt something from him. It wasn't an emotion, it was an intent. It was the feeling a mouse gets just for a second when the shadow of the hawk passes over it. He wasn't just empty. The emptiness wasn't camouflage. It was a lure. I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have called the police, told them what? That I met a man who felt like nothing? I did the stupidest thing I could possibly have done. I tried to help him. It sounds insane, I know, but that's what I do. I'm the helper. He was the ultimate challenge, the ultimate project, the man with nothing inside. I actually thought, maybe I could teach him. Maybe I could fill the void. We met a few more times. Public places. He was perfect. He was a flawless mimic. He was polite. He was funny in a dry, quiet way. He asked me questions about my life, my job. He was everything a person is supposed to be. And I was studying him. Taking notes, feeling like a scientist who'd found a new species. I thought I was the one observing him. I didn't realize he was just learning how to hunt me. Tonight, he invited me to his apartment to talk. I know, but my gift was useless and my curiosity, that stupid toxic part of me that has to know what's under the floorboards, it was driving. His apartment was clean. I mean, sterile, like a model home, not a single thing out of place. It was on the 12th floor. The city lights looked beautiful through the floor-to-ceiling glass, like a million tiny, screaming souls trapped in the grid. He was in the kitchen, making tea. He was so normal. He moved with an economy of motion that was hypnotic. It's just, I don't know, I was saying, my voice trembling slightly, trying so hard to sound like a therapist and not a terrified lab rat. When you think about your childhood, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Running, he said. He didn't turn around. I remember running. It was a good feeling, the burn in your lungs. I felt a prickle, not from him, from the room. Something was wrong. The air was too still. Where are the photos? I asked. He stopped pouring the water. What? Photos? Of you? Your family? Anything. There's nothing personal here. He turned, holding a mug. He had that polite smile plastered on again. I am not sentimental. I looked around the room. No mail, no magazines, no dust. It wasn't a home. It was a stage. It was a trap. And then I saw it. On his kitchen counter, next to the ultra-modern kettle, a small brown leather bracelet braided with a single silver bead. My blood didn't just go cold, it turned to ice. I knew that bracelet. My 3 p.m. patient, a young woman named Minnie. She was terrified of her ex. She was sweet, fragile, and trying so hard to be brave. We'd worked on grounding techniques. I told her to wear something tactile to touch it when she felt panic. She showed me the bracelet. She said her grandmother gave it to her. Minnie missed her appointment yesterday. She missed her appointment today. I stared at the bracelet. My heart just stopped. Where did you get that? My voice was a croak. He followed my gaze. His smile, it didn't fade. It wasn't a fade. It was a deletion. Like turning off a light switch. The polite mask was gone. The nothing was gone. He looked at the bracelet, and he looked at me, and I saw it. The same black, oily thing I'd felt from Uncle Henry, but it wasn't hate. It wasn't anger. It was use. It was the feeling a man has for a hammer. It was the cold, slapped, absolute nothing of a predator that just is. He knew I knew. I didn't scream. I just turned and ran for the door. I was 3 meters away. I'm not slow. He was on me before I took the second step. It wasn't a tackle, it was efficient, like a machine. One hand grabbed my hair, yanking my neck back so hard my neck popped. The other arm wrapped her up my throat. There was no anger, no panic, just action. I couldn't breathe. My gift, my empathy, all of it, what a joke. I was just a body, a small, weak body against a monster. I felt the ultimate fear. Physical helplessness. My gift couldn't save me. It just made me a target. I was kicking, trying to pull his arm away, but it was like iron. My vision started to go dark. The edges, the city lights from the window were getting blurry. The last thing I felt wasn't his emotion. It was the cold, sterile emptiness of the apartment and the sudden, sharp prick of a needle in my neck. Blackness.
The first thing I felt was the rope. It was rough, fibrous. It was biting into my wrists. My head was throbbing. A dull, heavy pain, like my skull was full of wet cement. My eyes, they felt glued shut. I forced them open. Darkness. Not the blackness of the unconsciousness. This was a room. I could see the faint outline of beams on a ceiling, maybe a meter above my face.
I was on the floor. It was cold. Hard wood. The air smelled wrong. It smelled like pine and damp and old cold fireplace ash. I wasn't in the city. The memories hit me like a landslide. The bracelet. Minnie. The apartment. The speed. Panic. Pure animal panic. I tried to scream. A dry, rough fabric met my mouth. A gag. It was so tight, all that came out was a muffled, pathetic I was bound. Wrists behind my back. Ankles, too. I was in a cabin. I was alone. I don't know where he is. I don't know if he's in the room sitting in the dark, or outside, or gone. My whole life, I was haunted by that feeling I got from Uncle Henry, that badness. I spent my whole life trying to understand the darkness inside people. But I was wrong. It's not the darkness you have to fear. It's the nothing. My gift? It was never a gift. It was a light. And it just showed me the one thing in the world that doesn't have a shadow. The man I couldn't read, I'm in his house now. I'm in the dark. And I can't hear a single thing.
Realize how desperately you need control until it's gone. For 17 years, my life was a fortress of control. I lived in a city of concrete and right angles, worked a 9 to 5 where my day was dictated by scheduled meetings and color-coded spreadsheets, and came home to an apartment where even the temperature was preset to a perfect 72 degrees. I was Hillary, senior data analyst, and my world made sense. It was predictable. It was safe. It was also suffocating me. That's why I took up survivalism. It started as a hobby, a way to feel a little less like a cog in a machine. I devoured books by grizzled old mountain men, watched hours of shows about guys with beards building shelters out of sticks and mud. I learned 100 ways to start a fire, how to find north using a watch, how to filter water with layers of sand and charcoal. In theory, I was more capable than any of them. I had the knowledge, meticulously cataloged in my brain, cross-referenced and optimized. It made me feel powerful, in control. Then came the promotion. Or rather, the promotion that wasn't mine. I'd been chasing it for 2 years, putting in the 80-hour weeks, swallowing the corporate nonsense, playing the game. They gave it to Mark from accounting. Mark, who couldn't format a spreadsheet to save his life, but knew how to golf with the VP of sales. When my boss, Dave, called me into his glass-walled office, he gave me that fake pity look they teach in management seminars. We just felt Mark was a better fit for the culture of the leadership team, which was corporate speak for, he's one of the boys. I just nodded. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked back to my desk, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and felt the walls of my carefully constructed fortress crumble into dust. It wasn't about the money or the title. It was the feeling of being rendered completely, utterly insignificant, powerless. That's when this trip stopped being a hobby. It became a necessity, a pilgrimage. I needed to prove to myself that I was more than a name on a rejected promotion application. I needed to be somewhere real, somewhere where the rules were clear and brutally honest. You are either capable or you are not. There's no office politics in the deep woods. So I planned it with the same obsessive detail I'd use for a quarterly report. Topographical maps, laminated, gearless, cross-checked, mule plans, vacuum sealed. So here I am. 2 days in, maybe 50 kilometers from the nearest paved road, deep in the Kaskaskia National Forest. My camp is perfect, just like in the books. The A-frame tent is secure, pitched on high ground with the door facing east. The fire pit is a model of safety, ringed with stones, a safe distance from any low-hanging branches. My water filter is bubbling away, turning murky creek water into life. Every single thing is exactly where it should be, a perfect little island of order in the heart of the wild. I am capable. I am in control. But as the sun bleeds out behind the jagged line of pines, the forest is changing. The friendly afternoon birdsong has been replaced by an unearning silence. And underneath that silence, there's something else. A sound. No, not a sound. It's a feeling, a low thrum that vibrates up through the soles of my boots. Like the whole world is holding its breath. I try to dismiss it. Distant logging equipment, an underground stream. But it feels wrong. It feels like the feeling of being watched. Not by a bear or a coyote, but by something that knows my name. And the most terrifying part, this feeling isn't in any of my books.
That feeling, that deep, resonant thrumming didn't go away. It was a constant, a bass note under the skin of the world, and it was getting stronger. I tried to rationalize it. Low-frequency sound can travel for miles, I told myself, my brain automatically quoting a passage from the SAS Survival Handbook. It was probably just some distant machinery, a train, anything from the world I'd left behind. But my gut, an instinct I didn't know I had, told me I was lying to myself. The source wasn't miles away. It felt close, and it felt alive. That's when the rain started. Not a gentle pitter-patter, but a sudden cold drizzle that felt less like weather and more like a decision. It soaked the carefully stacked firewood I'd gathered and hissed at the edges of my perfect fire. My little island of control was being washed away. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my confidence. Okay, don't panic. Adapt and overcome. I pulled my poncho tighter and scanned the darkening woods, my headlamp cutting a nervous slice through the gloom. And then I saw it. A dark opening in a rock face, not 20 meters from my camp. A cave. Dry, dark, and deep. It was a stroke of unbelievable luck, a perfect ready-made shelter. My training kicked in. A cave offers superior protection from the elements, a natural fortress. With a surge of renewed confidence, I grabbed my pack and scrambled towards it, dragging my essential gear into the dry, earthy-smelling darkness. Forget the tent, forget the fire. This was better. I was still in control. I had adapted. I was a survivor. I sat just inside the mouth of the cave, watching the drizzle turn into a torrential downpour. The world outside became a wall of gray noise and blurred green. It was actually cozy. I felt safe, smug even, for my cleverness. I pulled out an energy bar and took a bite, feeling the sweet victory. Let it rain. Let the storm rage. I had outsmarted it. But as the last of the daylight vanished, the sounds of the forest changed. It wasn't the silence from before. This was different.
It was a chorus of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, frantic and wrong. It sounded like every small animal in the woods was running, all at once, in every direction. Running from something. My breath hitched in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. And then, at the edge of the tree line, a shape emerged from the rain. It was too big to be a black bear. Its silhouette was wrong, hulking and broad in a way that defied the natural order. It just stood there, motionless, a black void against the gray storm. I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details, but I didn't need to. Every survival instinct I'd ever read about screamed at me in a single, silent word: predator. I shrank back into the cave, my body turning to ice. My meticulously planned trip, my test of self-reliance, had just turned into a terrifying waiting game. The cave wasn't a shelter, it was a trap, and the monster was blocking the door. For what felt like hours, I did nothing. I just sat there in the cold dark, my back pressed against a rock, and watched the shape. I was waiting for it to move on, to lose interest, to do what the book said a wild animal should do. It didn't. It just stood there, an unmoving sentinel in the downpour. My analytical mind, the part of me that color-coded spreadsheets and built fortresses of logic, kicked in to fight the rising tide of panic. "It's just a bear," it insisted. "Probably a Kodiak, far from its normal territory. Unusual, but not impossible. It doesn't know you're here. Stick quiet. It will lose interest." I clung to that thought like a prayer. It was my last anchor to the world I understood, the world that followed rules. But the thrumming I'd felt earlier was back, stronger now, radiating through the rock and bone of the cave. And it seemed to be coming from the bear itself. It was a low, guttural vibration that I could feel in my teeth. I slowly, carefully, unzipped a pocket on my pack and pulled out my night vision monocular, another piece of expensive, top-of-the-line gear I'd bought to feel prepared. My hands were shaking so badly it took me a few seconds to focus it. I raised it to my eye, the world outside turning a sickly digital green. The creature was still there, its form massive and shaggy. I zoomed in, trying to get a detail, anything to make it make sense. Then a flash of lightning split the sky, and for a terrifying, unforgettable second, the world outside was brighter than day. The monocular flared, blinding me, but not before the image was burned into my retinas. The creature's fur was matted and black, slicked with rain like crude oil. Its head was massive, but the face wasn't a bear's. There was no snout. Just a flat, brutal mask of fury with eyes that glowed with a faint internal red light. And it wasn't standing on 4 legs. It was standing on 5. A 5th leg, thick and wrong, protruding from the center of its chest, the massive paw at its end digging a trench in the wet earth as it shifted its weight. A choked sob escaped my lips. My brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. My books, my shows, my meticulously cataloged knowledge, all of it was useless ash in the face of this impossibility. 5 legs, glowing eyes. That wasn't an animal, that was a monster from a story told to frighten children. And as that realization hit me, a new sound cut through the storm. It didn't come from the monster outside. It came from the darkness behind me. Deeper in the cave, a voice, high-pitched and unnervingly calm, echoed off the damp rock. It was as clear as a bell, perfectly articulate, and it spoke a single word. "Hillary." My name. Hearing my name in that place, in that perfectly calm, high-pitched voice, broke something in my mind. The storm, the rain, the 5-pod monster at the mouth of the cave, all of it was a physical, understandable threat. But this was different. This was an intelligence. This was personal. This was the Watcher in the woods.
Who's there? My voice was a pathetic, trembling whisper that the damp air seemed to swallow instantly. The voice from the darkness answered without hesitation, its tone light, almost conversational, like a friendly stranger making small talk. "Just a friend, Hillary. I've been waiting for you. That thing outside, he's one of mine. A bit messy, I'll admit, but he gets the job done. He's here to keep you safe. With me." My blood ran cold. One of his? The bear wasn't a random monster, it was a guard dog, a hound set to keep the prey cornered. My meticulously chosen shelter wasn't a refuge, it was a pantry. Every single decision I'd made since the rain started, every clever adaptation I thought was a victory for my survival skills, had just herded me deeper into the trap. The feeling of being powerless, the one I'd fled my sterile office life to escape, crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. I was a data point on a spreadsheet again, a variable in someone else's horrifying equation. I scrambled backward, away from the voice, my back hitting the damp cave wall with a thud. My headlamp beam sliced wildly through the darkness, revealing nothing but glistening rock and deep shadow. In front of me, the monstrous bear shifted, its bulk blocking the silvery light of the storm. I was caught. A rock and a hard place didn't begin to describe it. "Don't be afraid," the voice cooed from the blackness. "I know all about you. I know about the promotion you didn't get. I know about Mark and Dave and that little glass office. I know how small they made you feel." Every word was a precise surgical cut into my deepest insecurities. "You came here to feel big, didn't you? To feel in control. I can give you that. Real control, real power. Not like the make-believe power they hand out in boardrooms. Just come a little deeper. We can talk about the terms." My survivalist brain, the last bastion of my old self, screamed at me. It was a lure, the oldest trick in the predator's book. Isolate the prey, disorient it, offer it what it wants most, and then spring the trap. It was trying to get me off balance, to make me walk into the dark. My only chance, the books would say, was the devil I could see. The bear at the entrance took a heavy step forward into the cave, then another. Its red eyes fixed on me, its face illuminated by another flash of lightning, began to shift. The matted fur seemed to retract, pulling back into the flesh as the bone structure beneath it audibly cracked and reformed. The flat, brutish features stretched and contorted. It was becoming something hideously, mockingly human. A caricature of a face, mouth pulled wide in a silent, furious scream. That was it. My mind snapped. I wasn't going to be a victim cowering in the dock. I was a survivor. I saw my chance. A narrow gap, maybe 2 feet wide, between the creature's side and the cave wall. If I was fast, I could slip past it. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my hand closing around the small survival knife at my belt. It was a pathetic weapon against that thing. But it was mine. It was an action. It was control. I ran. I lunged for the gap, screaming a raw, ragged sound of defiance. For a split second, I thought I'd made it. I felt the cold, rain-soaked air on my face, smelled the ozone from the storm. Freedom! Then something slammed into my side with the force of a car crash. It wasn't one of the 4 paws I was watching for. It was the 5th one, the one from its chest, hooking into my ribs with an unnatural, prehensile precision. It lifted me off the ground as if I weighed nothing.
my knife clattering uselessly onto the rocks.
I was pinned. The creature slammed me against the cold, wet cave wall, the jagged rack biting into my back. All the air rushed out my lungs in a pained grunt. The pain was blinding, a white-hot explosion in my side, but it was nothing compared to the absolute, soul-crushing terror of my utter helplessness. I was staring into its morphing, impossible face, now just inches from mine. The human-like mask was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of shadow and those two burning red embers. It smelled of wet fur, decay, and cold stone. My knowledge, my planning, my desperate need to prove myself, all of it meant nothing. I was just meat, caught in a trap I'd walked into with a smug sense of accomplishment. My vision began to tunnel, the edges turning gray and fuzzy. The sounds of the storm faded into a dull roar. The only thing I could hear clearly was the high-pitched voice echoing from the darkness one last time. It was no longer soothing or conversational. It was filled with a kind of detached clinical curiosity, the tone of a scientist observing a failed experiment, the tone of my boss telling me I just wasn't a good fit. "You see, Hillary," it said, the words sliding into my fading consciousness like splinters of ice. "You never had control, not in your little office, and certainly not out here. But thank you for playing." The fifth paw squeezed, and I heard my ribs crack like dry twigs. A scream tried to form in my throat, but it came out as a wet gurgle. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of pain and darkness. The funny thing about control is that you think it's something you can achieve. I spent my whole life building a fortress against the feeling of being small and insignificant, only to run headfirst into a world where I was, truly and cosmically, nothing. My greatest trauma, the fear of being powerless, was not just a fear. It was a fundamental truth of my existence. I wasn't an analyst, or a survivor, or even a victim. In the end, I was just the entertainment for it. My last coherent thought wasn't of my life, or my family, or anything meaningful. It was the simple, devastating data point that my meticulously constructed fortress was built on a foundation of absolute nothing. Then there was only the thrumming and the dark.
There are more scares to share. Press the like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single terrifying moment. You're helping me investigate the deepest, darkest corners to bring you stories that haunt your dreams.